All right, so this is a little introduction to the Nikon FG. This is a 1980s 35 millimeter SLR. It is battery dependent, so it'll only work, I believe, on one speed if the battery is either dead or not in the camera. It had some advancements of the day. It has a program and auto setting. I believe for those to work, you will need to have the program and aperture priority setting, not auto setting. For program, I believe you need the lens set in the smallest aperture setting. So on this lens, it's a f/22. It has the fairly typical annoying camera beep sound of that era that you can turn off like this. This is a lock for the, so you don't accidentally take the exposure setting ring, the shutter speed setting ring, and move it off aperture or program accidentally. So it has a two-part film advance so that it can sort of lay flat while it's in position there. It has like two little swivel positions there. Yeah, so the only manual setting that will work without a battery is with the 90. B is for bulb. This keeps the aperture open, or the shutter open as long as you hold it down, or if you're using a cable release, you can just leave it locked in position as an option if you want to do a really long exposure. The ISO, this predates DX coding, so you have to set the ISO if you put a new roll of film with a different ISO in, and that's done by lifting up on this ring here and then rotating it and putting the red mark on the appropriate speed. So I just set this to 200. This locks the exposure compensation dial. So it's the same ring, but you press this down and it'll move differently. Unless you're doing something special, you're going to want to leave this in the 0 position. But if you were out photographing on a ski vacation and everything around you was white, you might consider bumping up the exposure to +1, because the meter's fooled by the overwhelming whiteness and trying to make everything, it will try to make everything equal gray. So if your scene is not average, that's what this compensation ring is for. So if you use a combination of an aperture and a shutter speed like this, you are manually setting the exposure. So you could either, inside there's a meter that will, you can see, and you can just balance out the reading so that you get what the camera thinks is the correct exposure. Or you could use an external exposure meter, or you could use the Sunny 16 roll. Like if it's sunny and you're using, what did we say, 200, the closest ISO shutter speed to the ISO, so 250th in this case, and it's a sunny day. And if you're not like crazy far north or south, if you're in Norway in the winter, that might be a problem. But if you're in where most people live, not that far from the equator to whatever, 40 degrees north or south, and it's a nice sunny day with 250th at f/16 would work well for ISO 200 film. So there you go. But you could also set this to aperture priority, and if you depress the shutter button halfway, the LEDs inside will light up, and an LED light will light up next to the shutter speed that the camera's chosen for you, and it will expose at that shutter speed. For program, you're going to need to set the dial to P and the aperture to the smallest aperture setting, as I mentioned earlier. And the camera will choose both the shutter speed and aperture for you. And that's pretty much it. Let's see, how about loading film might be a useful thing too, maybe. So here we will, as with most cameras of this vintage, you start to unload the film, first thing you want to do is make sure there's no film in there. You don't want to open it up and expose all the film accidentally. So you can spin the rewind knob a few times, and then you pull up on the rewind knob, it'll stop, and then if you exert just a little bit more pressure, it'll crack open, and actually there was some film in it, but it was already wound, so that's apparently why we did not feel the friction. And this camera came from a thrift store, and presumably this is somebody's film that they forgot to take out of the camera before they donated it. Okay, so we're just going to lie the camera out like this, and I have a just a test roll of film I care nothing about. It's a roll of 64 tungsten slide film by Fuji. Not particularly useful nowadays, especially tungsten. Tungsten film. It's a color film that was balanced for incident light, so like old school light bulbs, to get the color balance correct. If you were taking photos of either on a copy stand, an interior using regular incident light bulbs. A copy stand could be using incident light bulbs or hot lights, tungsten lighting, and it could also be for, like, although this is a little slow for it, one of the original purposes for this sort of film, when you saw higher ISOs, was to photograph things like plays and that sort of thing. So, the stages were lit at with that color balance as well. So this camera does have another interesting feature, actually. I think it's very clever. So I loaded the film. I guess I was talking a little too much, but one of the things I would normally recommend is you want to just wind this taut so you can watch this move when you advance the film. But notice this: I set the the shutter to 1 second, but listen to it. That's not 1 second. You know why that is? Is because they had a clever little thing. If you had the shutter speed set to 1 second and you were loading the film, you'd just be wasting your time, right? So you normally want to get the film loaded, and ideally you just have a really short exposure. And so what they did was, you normally have to wind the film forward to a few frames till the counter reads 1. And notice, so that was not a second, but once we hit 1, then the camera will do its full 1 second exposure. That's 1. So that was a clever little idea they had. So manual 90 bulb. I think that pretty much covers most of this. This is the button to remove the lens. This is a standard lens that would have been completely normal. It was the same age bracket as the camera. This was it's well regarded, but it's the economy version of the 50mm lens, the E series. And it was small and inexpensive, but it actually has quite a good reputation. This is a self-timer, so if you wanted to do a selfie back in the 1980s, you put your camera on a tripod or try to, put it on a post or something where it would just stay pointed in the direction you wanted, set it up, and you would press the button and you'd wait, and it's quite a long self-timer. There you go. Any other features here to these are contacts probably for an optional auto winder, which would be something you'd probably have very little interest in, and nowadays can't imagine anybody wanting that. And this is a window where, when you're loading the film, if you think about this at the time and actually have the box for the film, this isn't the right film, but I just happen to have a box of this lying around. You put the box top in here, and then when you pick up your camera the next time, you remember, oh, that's black and white, or it's color, or whatever. So there you have it.